When I got married, I didn't mention the house my grandma left me, fully paid, Oceanfront, worth $3 million. The day after the wedding, my father-in-law showed up with a lawyer and said, "This belongs to the family now." I, 32M, thought I'd married the woman of my dreams. Turns out I'd married into a family of vultures who'd been circling my inheritance since day one. The morning after our honeymoon, I was unpacking wedding gifts when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my father-in-law standing next to a man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. My stomach dropped. This couldn't be good. I opened the door, and my father-in-law didn't even bother with pleasantries. He pushed past me into my living room, the lawyer trailing behind him like a loyal hound. He looked around my modest apartment and smirked, then announced that we needed to discuss some important family business. The lawyer introduced himself and explained they were here about my inheritance. My blood went cold. During our entire relationship, I'd never mentioned the house my grandmother left me. It sat empty on the coast about 2 hours away, a beautiful oceanfront property worth over $3 million. I'd been paying the taxes and maintenance from my savings, planning to surprise my wife with it as our future family home when we were ready to start having children. The lawyer pulled out a stack of papers and explained that as part of the family now, all significant assets needed to be transferred into joint family holdings. My father-in-law nodded along, saying this was how their family had always operated, how they'd built their wealth over generations. He acted like I should be grateful to be included in their family business structure. I told them I had no idea what they were talking about. The lawyer smiled condescendingly and explained they'd done their research. They knew about the house, knew what it was worth, and knew I'd inherited it free and clear. My father-in-law added that keeping secrets from family wasn't acceptable, especially secrets about assets that could benefit everyone. My wife chose that moment to come home from her morning yoga class. She walked in, saw the three of us standing around my coffee table covered in legal documents, and immediately understood what was happening. But instead of looking surprised or confused, she looked relieved, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. That's when it hit me. She'd known all along. I asked her directly if she'd told her father about the house. She couldn't meet my eyes as she explained that her family had a right to know about significant assets. She said she'd mentioned it to her mother a few weeks before the wedding, thinking it would help with planning our future together. Her mother had apparently shared this information with her father, who'd immediately started making arrangements. The lawyer interrupted our conversation to explain that the paperwork was all prepared. All I needed to do was sign, and the house would be transferred into a family trust that would benefit everyone. My father-in-law assured me I'd still have access to the property, but it would be managed properly now, maybe even turned into a profitable rental investment. I told them all to get out of my apartment immediately. My father-in-law's demeanor changed instantly. He said I was being unreasonable and ungrateful, that families were supposed to share everything. The lawyer warned me that refusing to cooperate could cause serious problems in my marriage. My wife just stood there, saying nothing. After they left, my wife and I had the fight of our lives. She accused me of not trusting her enough to tell her about the house. I pointed out that she'd proven my instincts right by immediately telling her family about my private inheritance. She insisted her family only wanted to help us build a better future together. I spent the next week thinking everything through. I realized this wasn't just about the house. This was about control, about the kind of family I'd married into, and about whether my wife was truly on my side or theirs. I made my decision. The following Monday, I called my lawyer and had him look into the legal documents my father-in-law's attorney had prepared. He confirmed what I'd suspected. Signing those papers would have essentially given my father-in-law control over my inheritance while leaving me with almost no legal recourse to reclaim it. I also discovered something interesting. My wife had been asking specific questions about the house's value and legal status for months before our wedding. She'd even contacted the county assessor's office to get detailed property records. This wasn't a casual mention to her mother. This was a calculated investigation. That evening, I told my wife I wanted to see the house together. She seemed excited, probably thinking I was ready to compromise. We drove out there the next weekend, and I watched her reaction as we pulled up to the stunning oceanfront property. Her eyes lit up as she calculated the possibilities. She immediately started making plans out loud. Her parents could use the guest house when they visited. Her brother could bring his family for summer vacations. Maybe they could host family reunions there. She talked about renovations and improvements, all funded by renting the property when we weren't using it. I let her talk. I let her plan. I let her envision the life she thought we were going to build with my grandmother's legacy. Then I dropped the bomb. I told her I'd decided to sell the house. Her reaction was immediate and telling. She didn't ask why or express concern about losing something that could have been our family's future. Instead, she panicked about her family's expectations. She asked what she was supposed to tell her parents, how she was supposed to explain that the house they'd been counting on was gone. That's when I knew for certain that our marriage was over. But I wasn't ready to reveal my hand completely. I told her I was having second thoughts about selling, that maybe we could work something out. She relaxed visibly and started suggesting compromises that all involved her family maintaining some level of control or benefit from the property. Over the next few weeks, I played along while secretly making my real preparations. Update 1. I contacted a forensic accountant to review our joint finances and discovered my wife had been moving money around in ways that didn't make sense. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger obvious red flags, but consistent transfers that suggested she was building a separate fund. When I confronted her about it, she claimed she was saving for a surprise anniversary trip. The amounts she'd moved corresponded exactly with the estimated monthly rental income from my grandmother's house. I also hired a private investigator to look into my father-in-law's business dealings. What I found was disturbing. He had a pattern of acquiring properties through family connections, legal pressure, and manipulation. 3 of his son-in-law's families had ended up in financial partnerships that left them with little control over their own assets. My wife had 3 sisters, all married. I reached out to their husbands individually, being careful not to reveal why I was asking questions. The conversations were eye-opening. Each of them had been pressured into various business arrangements with my father-in-law. None of them seemed happy about it, but they all felt trapped by family expectations and their wives' loyalty to their father. One brother-in-law was particularly helpful. He warned me that once you let my father-in-law get any legal foothold in your assets, extracting yourself becomes nearly impossible. He'd been fighting for 3 years to regain control of a small business he'd started before marriage, but the family had convinced his wife that keeping it in the family trust was better for everyone. Armed with this information, I decided to accelerate my timeline. I told my wife I'd reconsidered selling the house and wanted to bring it into our marriage properly. I suggested we visit her parents to discuss the family trust arrangement they'd proposed. She was thrilled, thinking she'd finally convinced me to see things their way. The meeting was exactly what I'd expected. My father-in-law had revised legal documents prepared, this time with slightly better terms that made it look like I was getting a fair deal. He presented it as a generous offer, emphasizing how the family would help manage and improve the property. I asked detailed questions about the trust structure, the management fees, the decision-making process, and what would happen if my wife and I ever divorced. My father-in-law assured me that divorce wouldn't be an issue because his daughter would never leave a marriage, and besides, the trust was designed to protect family assets regardless of individual circumstances. That last comment sealed it for me. I told them I needed a few days to review everything with my own lawyer. My father-in-law looked annoyed but agreed. My wife seemed confident that her family's lawyer had crafted an offer I couldn't refuse. They were wrong. Update 2. Instead of reviewing their documents, I spent those few days executing my real plan. First, I transferred the house into an irrevocable trust with myself as the sole beneficiary and a corporate trustee that my father-in-law couldn't manipulate or pressure. The trust was structured so that no one else could ever gain control of the property, regardless of marriage, divorce, or any other circumstances. Second, I gathered evidence of my wife's financial deception and her family's pattern of asset manipulation. My lawyer assured me this would be crucial if the situation escalated to divorce proceedings. Third, I moved my personal assets into accounts my wife couldn't access and changed all my passwords and security questions. Then I called a family meeting. My wife's entire family gathered at her parents' house, expecting me to sign their documents and officially join their financial empire. Instead, I presented them with copies of the new trust documents and explained that the house was now permanently beyond their reach. The room erupted. My father-in-law accused me of being duplicitous and ungrateful. My mother-in-law started crying about family loyalty and trust. My wife's sisters looked shocked that someone had actually outmaneuvered their father. My wife's reaction was the most telling of all. She didn't look hurt or betrayed. She looked angry that I'd ruined her family's plans. She demanded to know how I could do this to people who'd welcomed me into their family. I explained calmly that I'd learned exactly what kind of family they were, and I protected my grandmother's legacy accordingly. I pointed out that truly welcoming me into the family would have meant respecting my inheritance, not immediately scheming to control it. My father-in-law tried a different approach. He offered to buy the house from the trust at market value, thinking he could still get control through a legitimate purchase. I informed him that the trust documents prohibited selling to any family member or their associates for 10 years. That's when the threats started. My father-in-law warned me that I was making a serious mistake, that families who don't stick together fall apart. My mother-in-law suggested that my behavior showed I wasn't ready for marriage, and maybe we should consider an annulment while it was still easy. My wife finally spoke up, but not to defend me or our marriage. She asked if there was any way to modify the trust, any loophole that might allow the family to benefit from the property in the future. I stood up and told them all that I needed some time to think about what kind of marriage I actually wanted to be in. My wife followed me to the car, begging me not to make any rash decisions, insisting that her family's intentions were good even if their approach was aggressive. During the drive home, she tried every manipulation tactic in the book. She cried about how much she loved me. She accused me of never trusting her. She promised that she could talk to her family and work out a compromise. She threatened that divorcing over this would ruin both our lives. But the most revealing moment came when she asked, almost casually, whether the trust could be dissolved if something happened to me. I realized then that I wasn't just married to someone who'd betrayed my trust. I was married to someone who might actually be dangerous. Update 3. That night, I packed a bag and checked into a hotel. I told my wife I needed space to think, but really I needed to ensure my safety while I figured out my next steps. The harassment started immediately. My father-in-law called demanding we resolve this situation like adults. My mother-in-law sent long text messages about family unity and forgiveness. My wife alternated between tearful apologies and angry accusations. But the most disturbing contact came from the family lawyer. He left a voicemail explaining that the trust I'd created might not be as ironclad as I thought, and suggesting we meet to discuss potential vulnerabilities in my legal strategy. I forwarded that message to my attorney, who immediately advised me to document all communication and consider filing restraining orders if the pressure continued. Over the next week, I learned just how extensive the family's network was. My boss received a call from someone claiming to be conducting a background check for a potential business partnership, asking detailed questions about my employment and financial stability. My apartment building manager was contacted by someone claiming to be from my insurance company, asking about the property and whether I was planning to move soon. My wife's family was investigating every aspect of my life, looking for pressure points and vulnerabilities. The breaking point came when I discovered my wife had been in my apartment while I was at work. Nothing was missing, but someone had clearly searched through my papers and computer. My building's security camera showed her entering with her key, staying for 2 hours, and leaving with a manila envelope. That evening, she called crying and confessing that her father had pressured her to look for any documents related to the trust. She claimed she'd refused to give him anything, but she begged me to understand that her family was just scared of losing me and wanted to find a way to work things out. I told her that breaking into my home and violating my privacy was the final straw. She started screaming that I was tearing apart her family over money, that my grandmother would be ashamed of how selfishly I was acting. The irony was incredible. They were the ones who tried to steal my inheritance, but somehow I was the selfish one for protecting it. I filed for divorce the next morning. My wife's reaction to the divorce papers was immediate and predictable. She hired her family's lawyer and filed counterclaims alleging that I'd hidden assets during our marriage. She demanded half the value of the house, claiming that my failure to disclose it before marriage constituted fraud. Her father went public with his version of events, telling anyone who would listen that I was a gold digger who'd married his daughter to gain access to their family's business network, then betrayed them when I got a better offer. He painted himself as the victim of an elaborate con game, but their strategy backfired spectacularly. My forensic accountant had documented my wife's financial deception throughout our relationship. My attorney had statements from the other sons-in-law describing the family's pattern of asset manipulation. Most damaging of all, We had recordings of my father-in-law explicitly stating that the trust was designed to protect family assets, regardless of individual circumstances, including divorce. The judge was not impressed with their claims. During the proceedings, more details emerged about the family's business practices. My father-in-law had been investigated by the state attorney general's office for elder financial abuse after several complaints from families who'd been pressured into unfavorable business arrangements. The investigation was ongoing, but the preliminary findings suggested a pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable family members. My wife's lawyer tried to argue that I'd married her under false pretenses by hiding my assets, but my attorney countered that she'd married me under false pretenses by concealing her family's intentions to steal those assets. The evidence strongly supported my version of events. 6 months after filing, the divorce was finalized. My wife received no claim to the house or any other assets I'd owned before marriage. She was also ordered to pay my legal fees after the judge determined that her claims were frivolous and potentially fraudulent. The house remains in the irrevocable trust, exactly as my grandmother intended when she left it to me. I've started spending weekends there, slowly turning it into the peaceful retreat she'd always envisioned. Sometimes I sit on the deck watching the sunset and thinking about how she'd probably have seen through my ex-wife's family immediately. My ex-wife moved back in with her parents. According to mutual friends, she's been telling people that I was psychologically abusive and financially controlling. Her family has been trying to set her up with other wealthy men, but word has apparently gotten around about their business practices. The other sons-in-law have started standing up to my former father-in-law more consistently. One of them actually filed suit to dissolve a partnership that had been bleeding his assets for years. Another moved his family to a different state to escape the constant pressure and manipulation. Looking back, I realized the red flags were always there. My ex-wife's intense interest in my financial planning. Her family's immediate assumption that they'd be involved in our major decisions. The way they talked about marriage as a business arrangement rather than a personal relationship. But I also learned something important about myself. When people show you who they really are, believe them the first time. My grandmother's house didn't just give me financial security. It gave me the power to protect myself from people who saw me as nothing more than an asset to be acquired and controlled. $3 million bought me more than just oceanfront property. It bought me freedom from a family that would have spent the rest of my life treating me like their personal ATM. And that's worth every penny.